Well, okay, here we go. This is a video I've been wanting to make for a long time, and it's to deal with my 1988 Honda Accord, and it's an LXI, and it's about the front brakes. So back in the old days, and as you can see, it's 3gs.com, and I started this thread in 2006. So what I did is I took the original stock brakes off, which were about 10.3 inches, and adapted larger rotors from an Integra Type R. So, and this Integra Type R would be the 97 to 2001. Very popular car. They didn't make a whole lot of them, but it was a very popular car as far as Honda Acura performance. And yeah, it's been a great upgrade. The original brakes were 10.3 inches again, and they would warp sometimes. They'd warp them pretty quick. Performance wise, they weren't too bad, and it was very hard at the time to get any kind of performance brake pad for it. So by going to the Integra, the Type R type setup, it uses a D503 pad, and that pad, there was all kinds of aftermarket support for it. There's all kinds of. I just bought another set a few weeks ago, and there's like 50 different kinds on Rock Auto, literally. So, and the price isn't too bad. Now, if you want to get real crazy, there's some $300-400 race pads, and there's special rotors, cryogenically treated rotors, etc. So, it was a good setup. It gave you a lot more potential. Anytime I do any kind of what I would think is like an upgrade and or something that would, when you modify your car, you want to make it so it gives you a lot more options of what you want to do. So I wouldn't have used a weird setup like from a Porsche or a BMW or something that I'd never be able to find the parts for. So that's where we're at with that. And like I said, I did this in 2006. It's 2023, so it's worked out really well for me. So I'm just going to go through it real quick. It's going to be kind of a little bit dry and boring because it's just mostly dimensions, but I've got a little script I'm reading off of. I did this online so I can go back and look what I did in 2006 because I don't always remember. So big positives, like I said, is rotor availability. The rotor is 11.1 inches, which is taller. It's also thicker, so it's 23 millimeters thicker, so that really helps with it, with the heat sink and not warping. You use a D503 brake pad, which is you can get all kinds of performance options. You also need the calipers, the bracket. I believe this is a T23 bracket. I couldn't really find that was the way they kind of designated brackets back in the day, and it may be stamped on some of them, but you can get this whole caliper set up, and even with the brake pads and the clips loaded at any parts store or Rock Auto or wherever you want to go. So that's kind of cool. The price is good too, and that was another thing. I didn't want to go crazy with aftermarket $3,000 brake setups. There was an AEM setup, and there was another company, and that's all gone with. So if you went with that setup, you can't find the parts for it anymore. So that happens, but that's another thing that I think was a big benefit. Another big benefit is you can use 15-inch rims, which is important because on these type of Honda cars, if you have to go to a 17-inch rim, and I've talked about this before, the overall height is you can't get this height in a 17. It'd be very, very hard. So every inch you add takes power off the motor, and obviously these stock cars don't have a lot of power, so you really would be hurting yourself. Nothing wrong with 17s or 18s or 19s or whatever. But in this case for Honda and the stock Hondas, it's keeping on this 15-inch rim, and there's plenty of tire sizes available, performance tire sizes available for a 15-inch still. That was what makes it great. Now this car originally came with 14s, and I upgraded to 15s probably about the same time. You have to use a 15-inch rim. I don't believe there's any 14s that'll work with this setup. There might be like one oddball rim, but I highly doubt it. And all the 15 rim combos that I know of work. I'm sure there's one out there that doesn't, but that is important. If your rims don't fit on your brakes, you're going to be probably upset. So okay, so that covered that. And it's a floating setup, not fixed. You can see the pin in this caliper floats. There's some new setups that are fixed calipers, and that might be in the future, you know, but it's expensive, and there's some trade-offs with fixed calipers, especially noise, because they're actually bolted stiff, so the only float is really in the rotor and the pistons. And I really think this is a non-ABS car. I really think ABS helps with fixed calipers, and I've had fixed calipers on other vehicles, and I think the ABS pulses a little bit to keep the pads close to the rotor and keep everything centered, where I think in a non-ABS car you're going to have trouble. I'm probably going to find this out, but it's probably getting a little off tangent, but I think you always want to use a floating caliper setup on a non-ABS car. I'll just make that statement. So that's the other thing to consider. The only real negative, and it's never bothered me, but the hub, I believe this is considered a 64 millimeter. I'll measure it while I'm talking, but I'm almost sure, yeah, 64. The rotors I'm using right now are true Integra Type R, and they're actually, I believe that's a 71. So you lose that center registry when you put it on. You can kind of see the rust ridge where it rides. I've never had, that means it's the lug center of the rotor. I've never had any trouble with that. They do make adapter rings, hub-centric rings that I believe you can go from 64 to, I believe it is 71. I just measured that rotor and it said 71 to me. But if that's an issue, you know, I did check an old rotor that I had a while ago, and you can tell it's old, and it's drilled for the pattern. So you need a 4x100, a rotor drilled for a 4x100 pattern. And Brian at fastbrakes.com, www.fastbrakes.com, sells these rotors. They're $53. I just checked. I usually don't like to do prices, but, and then the pattern, as you can see, he's kind of got two patterns, so you got to kind of pick your poison here. And on this setup, it's hub centric. So I remember using these rotors because the holes are not quite drilled right. I find it unusual that there's a 4 and a 4, because most of the rotors you get Integra Type R are 5-bolt, and then you have to either drill your own 4, which is what I did last time, or you get them from Brian and he ships them and they're $53 a piece. I'm a little perplexed, actually, as I was doing this, getting ready for this video. I never noticed that it's 4 or 4. So I think at one time he had his own rotors made, and then he could put whatever, you know, this is a 4-bolt. I think I'm 4x100, so he probably has got the other Honda Accord, it appears, on there. So yeah, a little perplexed with that, but then you did get your hub center. So that might be something to consider if that's really bothers you and you don't want to use adapters or anything, that you just you call them and double check that it's a 64 millimeter center, 4x100, and you know, maybe that's an issue for you. I actually never noticed, so I don't get any vibrations or anything. Like I said, I drilled my own last time with a hand drill. I did a terrible job, and yeah, I've not had any problems, so that, you know, that could be an issue possibly. You do need to make a bracket, and what the bracket does is it goes behind where the caliper mounts, and then all it does is it's pushing the caliper out because the rotor is taller. So this rotor hat is 47 millimeters, where I think the stock one was like 22 or something. So just by using a 4 millimeter bracket, and at one time I just made little squares of metal, and then some people had an issue online, it might be dangerous or something. I have no idea why. So I was like, okay, well, I'll make a continuous like little dog bone deal and put that in there, and that's kind of what it came out to be. You can see I kind of didn't do such a great job here. and you do have to have this clearance here. So it's like a little bit of extra machine work. It's just a regular piece of plain steel. I've had that forever. I don't even think I painted it. And what you do with that is you need about 4 millimeters spacing, and that's probably the most important thing. I'm going to check that, make sure. Yeah, so pretty close. A little undersized. They've been used for a while too, so. And something like that, you could make with a hand. You could grind that flat with a angle grinder or whatever, or if you're just making little spacers. But that's really the key to it, is the drilled rotors, and then this spacer, and then I have an LXI, so I have LXI knuckles. There is an Accord. I don't know exact years. It's the 87 and 86 and 87, and they usually have carburetors. They'll have a smaller brake rotor. I believe it's a 9.5 inch rotor. So you want to have 10.3 to start with and 10.3 knuckles. Now Brian has some kits for 9.5 inch Civics. Can't have the same small size, and Brian has some very nice kits. So you may be able to mix and match or get something that fits yours. He makes a nice little aluminum bracket. You know, it's powder coated and everything. It's going to cost you a few bucks, but most of his kits are under like $500 for a little upgrade. He's got some big money kits, of course, but so yeah, that's kind of how that all works. And I want to make sure I'm telling you the right direction. I actually really think it goes like this, because the space in the caliper to give you space there. So yeah, and then the only other thing also is you need new bolts. Now I forgot what the length of the stock bolts are, but these bolts, they're 14 millimeter, and then the head is, on automotive bolts, the head seems to always be smaller than a normal. So this head is 19 millimeter. An automotive bolt, and Honda would have a flange, and then it'd be 17 millimeter. So, but it's a 14 millimeter thread, and then I do use a lock washer. And the reason why I use the lock washer is when you bolt everything together, you don't want the bolt rubbing against your rotor, and it could. So you can't really buy a bastard size. You know, they go in 20, 25, 30, 35. So I bought a 30, and then I use a lock, which I believe you should really use a lock washer anyway on something like this. That's personal opinion. You can use Loctite also, but as you can tell, these bolts are, you know, this is when I did this however long ago. So you got that. You got your bracket, and as you can see, I also did a little trimming right here of the water shield. I don't think you really need to on the bottom. I just pushed it down, but I actually probably just did it just to assemble everything a little easier, it looks like. And really, that's all there is to it. Now, I've got all the pictures and everything online. I'll leave the on 3gs.com. I'll leave the link in my YouTube description. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. So bracket, bolts, rotor drilled to 4x100 pattern. You can you can buy a Type R rotor and do it yourself. Like I said, I looked up, Brian's rotors are $53. The Type R rotors that you buy, I think you can get them less than $30. So $60 for rotors, $50 or $60 set for calipers. That's $120. You can get away with this setup for under $300 with brake pads, which is pretty amazing nowadays. And this stuff is still available. The Integra Type R, they didn't make many. Again, it's 97 to 2001. They didn't make a whole lot of them, but the car was so popular. And they use some parts for some other cars. Like I think it's the brakes are actually off the Prelude and another vehicle. So there was a lot of them, enough of them around that they were able to make parts. It's not something you're not going to be able to stop in any Napa or any place if you're on the road and you need a set of brake pads or something strange like that. And you know, that's really pretty much it. It served me well for all these years. I cannot remember a time I warped the rotors. I've worn a few sets down, but and the braking is really good. Now this is a non-ABS car, and I use 15-inch rims and 205/50 tires, or two, what I've got now, 245s. they're 200 tread wear tires, so you get a lot of grip, and you can use the whole brake. You can use the whole brake and not worry. And really, I don't have a problem with lockup or biasing. The piston's I believe it's a 52 millimeter. The piston really isn't much bigger than the stock, so your bias isn't going to be off. It's kind of really a no-brainer at this point, I think. I mean, you can go with the 10.3 brake package and be fine. I still don't think there's a lot of performance brake pads. I think EBC came out with a green, and I used it once or twice and it was good, but that was a long time ago. But if you look now, you're not going to find some super duper cryogenic rotors or Ray Bestis ST43s or anything like that if you're really tracking this or whatever. And the nice thing about this setup, especially with this the little dog bone bracket and the bolts, is now you can use any Acura Integra Type R setup. So if you saw like a $5,000 fixed caliper, floating rotor, slotted, this, that, and everything, you're all set to go because you have your little Mickey Mouse bracket and your bolts, and all you need is your rotor drilled to 4x100. And a lot of times they have multi patterns on the hats, and so you can put a super duper $5,000 setup on here with your 17-inch rims and I don't know what they go 13-inch rotors, whatever they go to nowadays. So you're upgradable by just doing this. And again, you don't have to change your suspension, your knuckles. You're not changing this out to a 5-bolt pattern. There's probably a way to do that. People have tried. I can't see too much of a benefit. Besides maybe you just have to have a 5-bolt setup for your favorite rims or whatever. So yeah, it's kind of a cool setup, really. And like I said, it's served me well. I've got a new setup that's gonna go on. I think y'all seen that video. Might be time for new calipers. It's been since '06, and these are probably not new. I'm gonna say they're remanufactured. They're the Nissan, I guess, brand. And rebuildable. You can get parts for rebuilding and stuff like that. So, that's really pretty much, I think, all I've got to add. Like I said, I've got the recipe list online, so you can look at that. It's a pretty straightforward bolt-on setup besides making the bracket. I did use a mill for this to make it pretty close, but you can grind that down. It doesn't have to be dead on 4 millimeters. You can be a little bit off and not have a problem. So it's just keeping the caliper in the middle of the rotor like that. So I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Let's move this a little bit, give you a little extra. But yeah, when you put the rotor on, you want the caliper right in the middle so the brake pads fit, and you're just making up the difference between the height of the two rotors. That's really all there is to it. So this doesn't change. You got the same hole pattern. I've seen a couple brackets where they like doubled up the holes and stuff like that. That's probably fine. It's a little corny, but just doing it like this, you should be good for a long time. Now, if you want to upgrade to, if you're on 17-inch rims and stuff like that, there's some other options, and they're going to cost you, but you probably could still get away with a nice fixed caliper setup for like $1,000. Again, fast brakes, they've got that. I'm sure there's 5 or 6 other companies that have something for Hondas, basically. But yeah, the nice thing is that this bolt hole, I believe that's 5 by 5, and I think that's 5.5 inches. I forgot the measurement actually. But that's pretty standard. So there's a lot of calipers that, especially if they side mount. There's some stud mounted calipers now, and they've got an adapter that goes from this to stud if that's what you think you need to have or whatever. So yeah, been a good setup. I mean, old school. You got a thicker rotor. It's 11.1 inches compared to 10.3, so not quite an inch, but that's a lot. That's 282 millimeters by 23, and that's your brake's a heat sink, so that helps. And the bolts, everything else is cheap. like I said, same lug nuts, same lug studs, everything for the last 30 years. So, yeah, not any problem. I did upgrade to stainless steel brake lines probably at the same time. That didn't really make any difference, but I did anyway, so no big deal. But that's all Bolton stuff. I appreciate you guys looking. Sorry it's a little bit dry with some of the numbers and stuff, but it's worth talking about. It's been out there a while. If you ever have any questions, always ask on the forums. I can help as best I can. So I haven't taken this apart in a while, so it's kind of cool to look at after you did something so long ago, and then you're like, oh wow.